morning, Tom.
Good morning. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. You sound
Good,
great.
good.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. First up this morning, we have Aaron Fleckenstein with the North Carolina Coastal Federation to talk about the North Carolina Oyster Blueprint. There she is. Lower right button.
How about that?
There you go.
Is that better? Do I need to pull it closer?
Can y'all hear in the back okay? Where'd
Full
everybody
crowd.
go?
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me this morning. I'm excited to be telling you a little bit more about the Oyster Blueprint that we released earlier this year. We're excited to have this compilation come together. The Oyster Blueprint, if you're not familiar with it, is a document that basically pulls together goals and actions from a lot of cross-cutting plans in the state, puts them into one comprehensive document that we then use to sort of inform our actions and restoration practices here in the state. So what I'm going to do today is go through the blueprint and give you some of the highlights of the plan for the next 5 years. I will stress that this is a voluntary plan. This is a plan that the Coastal Federation has issued in partnership with all of our many university, state agency, federal agency, and community partners. Okay. So efforts to create the blueprint really stem from the global decline in our oyster population, with nearly 85% of our oyster reefs being lost. The story is no different here in the state of North Carolina, and efforts have been underway since the early 1900s to build back and manage our depleted oyster resources. This timeline shows you a very abbreviated version of some of the management actions that have taken place in the state since the early 1900s, starting in 1915 with the division's effort, or the state's efforts to build culch-planted reefs, and then advancing through the early 90s with several management plans, including the Braco Report, the Fisheries Reform Act, Oyster Fishery Management Plan, as well as the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. So formalized in 2003, the Oyster Blueprint outlines these cross-cutting recommendations that build upon the actions that are outlined in those other plans that I just described for you. It's drafted into a comprehensive plan that we're calling the Oyster Restoration and Protection Plan for North Carolina, more commonly referred to as the Oyster Blueprint. We've issued it or reissued it roughly every 5 years since its first draft. It's guided by a statewide oyster steering committee, as well as regional and strategy work groups that help to inform the actions and keep the motivation going for implementation. The success of the blueprint has built on the 3 previous editions. So again, starting in 2003, again in 2008, and then 2015, we've issued 3 editions of the blueprint. And the work that I'm going to talk about really builds on the success of those earlier editions of the blueprint. There have been many accomplishments. This slide just highlights some of the major accomplishments in the last 15 or 20 years of the blueprint, including North Carolina joining NOAA's Oyster Shellfish Initiative, government and private agencies and other shellfish stakeholders coming together to coordinate habitat, water quality, and fishery management activities, increasing funding for oyster-related programs by a factor of 10 from 2003 to 2013, annually increasing oyster harvest, coming from a low of 34,500 bushels in the 90s, building 400 acres of harvestable reef, conducting a study that identified that for every $1 invested in our rehabilitation efforts, we see $4 in benefits, developing a strategic mariculture plan for the state, growing the shellfish aquaculture industry from a $1 million industry to a nearly $15 million industry now. I needed to update that slide. Building 50 acres of reef through the oyster sanctuaries, living shorelines, and patch reefs. Water quality degradation continues to be a concern, but there have been some localized improvements, and guiding research to refine these restoration and management activities. The blueprint is not something that's done in a vacuum. There are many partners that come together to ensure the success and identify the actions of the blueprint. So this slide shows some of the logos of the various state and federal agencies that are involved, organizations and universities that come to the table to help inform and guide the blueprint in its actions. If you're interested in reading the full report, you can access it online at ncoysters.org. I also brought with me today several copies of the strategy summary, as well as the full report if you want a hard copy of them. Leave those with you. So the blueprint identifies 8 strategies and dozens of action items that our statewide partners are working on collaboratively. The strategies are loosely grouped into 4 main themes of protection, restoration, harvest, and education. And you can recall that while the blueprint is linked to and incorporates actions from those other state plans, the goals and actions that are outlined in the blueprint are considered voluntary. So now I'm going to walk through these different strategies and highlight 1 or 2 of the major actions that we're hoping to accomplish in the next 5 years. So in the state of North Carolina, of course, everything begins with our waters. Pristine water quality is critical to oysters' success, both to support the habitat, as well as to ensure that oysters are safe for the human consumption. The good news is that on a national scale, North Carolina has a great deal of very clean water to grow our oysters and the oyster industry, but we cannot take that clean water for granted. 34% of North Carolina's waters are closed to shellfish harvest due to bacteria transported by runoff or a lack of monitoring. Concentrated efforts are needed to maintain and improve water quality in coastal North Carolina, including controlling stormwater, which is the #1 source of water pollution on the coast. So the top actions related to this strategy that we hope to accomplish in the next 5 years are to secure funding for 2 watershed restoration plans. So we've identified 2 critically important and endangered water bodies, and we want to create these watershed restoration plans for both the Stump Sound watershed as well as the Newport River estuary. And I'm excited to tell you that there is funding in place with the recently passed budget for both of these plans to move forward. So we are going to see a concentrated effort here in Stump Sound and Newport River in identifying actions that can be taken to ensure water quality is protected and restored wherever possible. This doesn't mean that there's not going to be actions taking place in other water bodies across the state. It's just that the blueprint partners have identified these 2 water bodies as priorities due to the harvest, farming, recreational opportunities, as well as potential threats in the watershed. So in addition to focusing on these 2 water bodies, we're also going to be releasing a prioritized list of additional water bodies that need protection and restoration moving forward. The next strategy is our oyster sanctuary strategy. And these are reefs that are strategically located throughout Pamlico Sound and are designed to provide oyster larvae to the wild population and culture planted areas. They're protected from harvest, but open to hook and line fishing. And these are large scale restoration efforts ranging in size from anywhere from 5 to 50 or 60 acres. So in the next 5 years, we want to establish sufficient acreage to protect our oyster reefs, to support these desired ecosystem services, including building fish habitat, supplementing our wild oyster stock, and filtering waters. By 2025, we want to build 100 acres of new oyster sanctuary. As I mentioned, these sanctuaries are only in Pamlico Sound currently, and so over the next 5 years, we're going to be studying to determine the feasibility of creating a similar or some sort of protected reef designation in our southern waters. And then we want to refine the estimates for how many acres of protected habitat are actually needed to reach ecosystem service goals. The next action or strategy that I'm going to describe is our living shoreline strategy. And these are environmentally friendly shoreline stabilization techniques that help to reduce shoreline erosion while simultaneously protecting and restoring valuable coastal marsh and oyster habitat. Over the next 5 years, the Blueprint partners will expand the use of living shorelines to become the most commonly used shoreline stabilization method. So this means adding 3 miles of living shoreline by 2025. And again, with the recently passed budget, there's a line item for $2 million worth of living shoreline projects to move forward. And there's additional state and federal grants that we have secured to help make this a reality, providing some incentives to homeowners for installing living shorelines. In addition to building the reefs, we also want to ensure that the living shorelines, especially when made from oyster reef material, are protected. Right now, if a living shoreline was constructed in open shellfishing waters, it has the potential to be harvested. And so we want to work to identify some protection measures, because if the living shoreline is constructed for shoreline stabilization and then it's harvested, it's potentially not doing its job of shoreline stabilization. There's an issue paper that DMF is working on, and the CHIP has identified this as a need as well. So figuring out how to best protect our living shorelines from harvest is moving forward. Oyster shell is a valuable resource in the state of North Carolina. It is used in many restoration activities to build our new oyster reefs. And that shell, when it's placed in the right locations, becomes home for new oysters. As you probably know, it is illegal to dispose of oyster shells in a landfill or use them for commercial landscaping in the state. And for many years, the Division of Marine Fisheries ran a very successful shell recycling program, collecting thousands of bushels of shell annually. However, through a series of budget cuts and changes in priorities, the division no longer runs that program. So about 2 years ago, the Federation and other stakeholders started working to fill that gap. Now, through an entirely volunteer-driven effort, the Federation and partners are working to collect shell and return it to the Sound to build more oyster reefs. In the next 5 years, we plan to recycle shell to provide about 5% of the needed material for reef building activities, which translates to roughly 15,000 bushels. And then identify priority reef locations where that recycled shell can be used, hoping to build 20 acres of reef by the end of that 5-year timeframe. The next strategy is our culch planting strategy, and this is of course run by the Division of Marine Fisheries and focuses on rebuilding oyster habitats for harvest opportunities. The culch planting program is the longest standing oyster management strategy in place in the state. Since 1915, the state has worked to return millions of bushels of culch to our harvestable waters where it can grow oysters and replenish our commercially harvested oyster beds. Continuing this program and studying it to make sure it is being implemented in the most cost-effective manner possible is a priority, maximizing our oyster growth and the return on investment. As I mentioned earlier, a study funded by APNEP and conducted by the Research Triangle Institute found that for every dollar invested in oyster restoration activities, the state realized $4 in benefits. And while that's fantastic, we want to study that program a little bit more and see if there's additional improvements that can be made to realize additional return on investment and improvements. So next year, the Federation is working with the Division of Marine Fisheries to hold a series of listening sessions with other states to learn from them, and also to bring everybody together in a day-long workshop to talk about how other states are running their culch planting programs or their reef building programs, and see if we can't share some lessons learned to maximize the return on investment here in the state of North Carolina. So stay tuned for that. Commercial wild harvest is an important component of the blueprint. Roughly half of our harvest that occurs in the state comes from wild harvest, and most of that wild harvest is occurring in the southern part of the state. The blueprint is one of the only oyster plans in the country that specifically calls out actions to support continued commercial wild harvest. Key to the success of wild harvest is developing a stock assessment for the fishery. This management tool is currently lacking in North Carolina. Researchers at NC State, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and Division of Marine Fisheries, as well as commercial fishers, are working to develop the proper methodology for the stock assessment. So the plan is to have that methodology dialed in the next 5 years so that we can then move into creating the stock assessment and doing the stock assessment after that. So the goal here is to sustainably manage our natural oyster habitats within public trust areas to perpetuate wild harvest and ecosystem services. And in the next 5 years, really improving the science and monitoring that informs the fisheries management plan, working towards a state stock assessment, and then coordinating with various other state plans, including the CHIP and the FMP. A seventh strategy of the blueprint is to promote and grow the shellfish aquaculture industry. The shellfish industry has seen tremendous growth in the state over the last decade, and despite some setbacks with storms and a global pandemic, the industry is poised to continue growing in North Carolina, reaching the goal of a $45 million industry by 2025 and a $100 million industry by 2030. Several elements are identified as priorities to grow the industry in a strategic and balanced way, namely developing a market study for growers and developing a low-interest loan program for the industry. And the loan program was another budget item that was funded in this last round of the budget. I didn't get word about the market study. So if one of you guys knows the market study was funded, I'd be happy to add that in. In addition to providing support for the growers through those incentive programs, we also hope to grow the Oyster Trail. This is a new strategy that Sea Grant and the Shellfish Growers Association have taken the lead on with the Federation to support the growing industry and build tourism experiences around our shellfish farming. And of course, last but not least is the importance of our outreach and engagement efforts through the blueprint. Critical to the success is good communication and outreach around this work. Hence me coming before you today to present about the blueprint so you know what's going on. The Federation and partners have developed a number of tools and resources to help document and communicate the success of the blueprint effort, including social media and a website, as well as printed documents, including an annual State of the Oyster report and other communication materials. Over the next 5 years, we're going to continue to work with our statewide Oyster Steering Committee and partner with many of the state agencies, museums, and aquariums, leveraging resources to communicate about the Oyster Blueprint, priorities, and successes. DMF has been a key partner in all of this so far and will continue to be in sharing and widely distributing information about the blueprint and progress. So the work that we have outlined in the blueprint is ambitious, and it takes the buy-in and support from all of our blueprint partners. We've seen some major progress over the last 5 years, or the last 15 years, in advancing the restoration, protection, and harvest of oysters, as well as education. And we're excited to embark on the next 5 years and build on this success moving forward. That is all I have for you this morning. I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Outstanding presentation. Anybody have any questions or comments? Commissioner Romano.
I appreciate that was a great presentation. I appreciate everything you guys are doing. This is right in my backyard. I have a oyster garden in the Stump Sound, so I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. I had a question, or just kind of a curiosity, if you guys have ever explored the option of like using commercial fishermen to help with the labor part of, a lot of you guys are moving a lot of shell, I'm sure, or dealing with a lot of material. If that had been something you thought about or discussion.
It is part of the discussion. I'm glad you brought it up because I think it really helps to ensure the buy-in and support for these activities when we're able to work hand in glove with the industry that's relying on these activities. In 2010, we received funding from, or 2009 and implemented in 2010, we received funding through the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. And through that, we were able to hire commercial fishermen to put mulch out. And it was a lot of coordination, but it was a really successful program. And so it'd be nice to see if we can do something like that again moving forward.
Great, that sounds great. I appreciate even the wild harvest portion, you guys doing that and specifically. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a commissioner on remote. Commissioner Roller, do you have a question?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for this presentation. I've been following this work. I think it's very admirable. And it's really great what we're doing with the just the oyster industry in general in North Carolina. As part of this blueprint, I was curious what you're doing about user conflicts, if you've had any discussion. And let me preface this as, you know, it's been interesting to me as we've expanded in recent years. I've actually heard from more people, particularly in the southern part of North Carolina, you know, Swansboro South, really concerned about the expansion of oyster leases in that area. And I'm worried that some of those user conflicts will undo some of this good work, at least by perception of other watermen. Could you touch on that at all?
Sure, and I'll let Jacob fill in if there's anything else he wants to say from the division specifically, but I know there's been a number of studies looking basically at land use planning, but water use planning, so that we're identifying the locations where shellfish leases can go, where the oyster sanctuaries and culch planting efforts can go. All of those are done through, you know, the regular public meeting process. And I will say that that's a great opportunity for people to voice their concerns. So the division has done a great job in trying to engage the public through those avenues. And in addition, I think the awareness building that we're trying to do through our outreach and education efforts to make people better understand why we're taking these efforts on, why we're building oyster reefs, and why we're encouraging the use of shellfish farming is a really important component of that. But certainly there's always more work to be done. I know in Bogue Sound, the division had partnered with NOAA on a spatial analysis of the sound and uses of the sound to help inform activities. Jacob, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, we've been doing a lot of work for user conflicts, and there's going to be in the package B rules that are going to be coming into effect hopefully next year. There's a lot of things that are going into effect for user conflicts, and you know, working through the Oyster Steering Committee and the mariculture subcommittees have definitely been informed by them and been able to do a lot more education outreach and getting feedback from the industry and other stakeholders. So it's definitely been a good partnership with that. And so we'll have a lot more stuff, user conflicts to update the commission on when those rules come into effect.
Thank you, Jacob, for that. And thank you, Aaron. But I just, you know, I guess my point was, you know, particularly as this is kind of outside, a little bit outside the rule, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of, this is a more broader thing. I just hope that, you know, that some of the outreach you're doing could help to look at that on a bigger level, right? So.
Yeah, and if you have specific suggestions, we'd be certainly open to learning from, you know, we think that we're doing a good job, but it's always nice to receive feedback from what other people are saying. So if you're hearing things and you have ideas of ways we can improve communication, we'd certainly be open to having a conversation about that.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Right. Anything else from anybody?
Dr. Posey.
Commissioner Posey.
Great work, you know, obviously I'm biased on that. My question is actually a bit more for the division. It follows up on Commissioner Roller's question. Are we still pretty much on track in establishing or proposing the oyster entrepreneurship zones? I know I had the name wrong, but the set aside areas the legislature has mentioned, which gets at some of the conflict.
I figured. That's a good question, Dr. Posey. So we are in the process of planning those, and we're reaching out to local municipalities, and we're starting out in the Bogue Sound area, and we're really trying to start having the smaller conversations with local municipalities, riparian owners in the areas, and then trying to move forward with that. So we'll be working on that a lot over the next 6 months and putting that together, and then trying to have some more regional stakeholder meetings.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. You're doing great work and we appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. And I do just want to make sure to give a big shout out of gratitude to Dr. Posey for his role in the steering committee, because he's been an instrumental partner in the steering committee over the last 20 years. So sorry, I admitted that earlier.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hey, next up is our Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. Ann Deaton and Jimmy Johnson, come on up.
This. You better do it. There it is.
Ready? Yep. Good morning. It's good to be before you this morning. This is our final commission. We've been making the circuit with the CRC and the EMC and now you all today. And it's good to be here with you. Ann and I are here to share with you the results of the public comments that we received during the open public comment session and also during the advisory committee meetings of the Marine Fisheries Commission. At the end of the presentation, we will be asking for your endorsement and the approval of the amendment. And I do want to take just a moment to thank Dr. Posey and Pete Cornegie for serving on the CHIP steering committee. They have done a lot of work over the past 2 years, and we appreciate the time and the effort that they have put into serving on that steering committee. The public comment period lasted from September 21st through October 21st. And then the CHIP steering committee met on October the 25th to review the comments that were received from the advisory committee meetings, as well as to look at the online survey that was available for people to participate in, as well as any comments that we received through the DEQ comment or email address. 4 of your advisory committees passed the same motion supporting the 2021 CHIP amendment and the inclusion of the stakeholder recommendations, especially the one to explore forming a public-private partnership to seek funding for and to advance the plans for the recommended action. The Northern Advisory Committee made a motion to accept the recommendations of the CHIP, but with additions to the wastewater infrastructure chapter regarding septic system infrastructure concerns. They also had an additional separate motion to add into the recommended actions in the SAV issue paper, wording to address reducing nitrogen loading into the atmosphere from animal operations, which is then deposited into surface water. The Finfish Advisory Committee also had a second motion to include in the document working with the Division of Soil and Water Conservation to introduce vegetative buffer zones on farms and livestock operations, especially in the coastal region. Other comments that we received during this period of time included a strong concern about water quality, as well as the urgency to take action and the benefits that those actions will have on the coastal economy. There was also a large amount of support for the public-private partnership at all of the advisory committee meetings. There was concern about intense development, lack of buffer requirements on farms, which impact shellfish harvest. There was some comments about the habitat in general and the effects that it has on the fish populations. And I think you all have heard a lot of that over the past day and a half. There was support for developing nutrient criteria for SAV and nature-based solutions to address runoff. And then support for recommended actions and funding needs in the CHIP, especially with regards to wastewater treatment infrastructure maintenance, compliance positions, as well as monitoring. On the online survey, there were 93 individual respondents, and 90% of those that responded were very concerned about coastal habitats and about water quality. On the graph at the right, the green bars show the results for the level of support for establishing nutrient targets and standards to improve water quality for SAV. The blue bars indicate the level of support for having SAV mapping and monitoring to assess management changes. The orange bars show the level of support for attempting to secure state funding to implement the recommended actions. And the yellow bars are an indication of the level of support for increasing use of nature-based management practices and low-impact development. Over 80% of the respondents strongly agreed with implementing nutrient standards. Over 90% strongly agreed that nature-based BMP should be implemented to a greater extent. And the respondents also strongly agreed with attempting to secure state funding to implement the recommended actions, including regular and sufficient mapping and monitoring efforts. There were several questions regarding the support for some of the wetland recommended actions, and staff tried and did the best that they could to answer those questions that were asked at the meetings. And again, the results that are shown here indicate strong support for the recommended actions, with over 75% of the respondents strongly agreeing with obtaining new, more accurate wetland maps, and that's indicated by the green bars. And over 90% strongly agreeing with restoring wetland hydrology and conserving land for marsh migration. And that's shown in the orange bars. There was strong but slightly less support for preventing oyster harvest from living shorelines. And that's on the blue bars. And then over 75% of the public said that they would be willing to implement nature-based solutions on their property to reduce runoff, and that's shown in the yellow bars. And we think that statistic right there is very encouraging, and the key to achieving success there is outreach and education and explaining how these nature-based solutions can be enacted by individual property owners. Environmental rule compliance, 90% of those that responded strongly agreed that adhering to rules can prevent habitat and water quality degradation, as shown by the green bars, and the funding should be provided for adequate staffing, and that's shown by the blue bars. With regards to wastewater infrastructure, 56% of those who responded have seen or have been affected by sewage spills. 90% strongly agreed that additional priority should be given to maintaining and repairing wastewater infrastructure where it's needed. Habitat mapping and monitoring, 85% strongly agreed that assessing habitat status was important for management. With regards to the online or the emails that were received by the department, there were 40 letters that were received along with 2 petitions. One of the petitions was from Audubon, North Carolina, and 461 people signed that petition supporting the CHIP. 796 signed a second petition supporting the CHIP that was sent in by the North Carolina Conservation Network. The suggested edits to the recommended actions and any changes to the text were discussed with the CHIP Steering Committee on the 25th of October, and we'll review those in just a minute, what they decided at that meeting. In the draft CHIP amendment, we've included an appendix which summarizes all of the public comments which were received. And this is a list of organizations that submitted letters. The organizations listed in bold prints are organizations that had concerns or requested significant change to the recommended actions. And while some of these that had concerns, almost all of the organizations had an overall positive, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, they all thought positively of the CHIP, but they had some, I think it's bad getting old. They all had valuable input and support for the document. And I think I'll just leave it at that right now. And I'm going to let Ann take over from here.
Thank you, Jimmy. So as Jimmy mentioned, all the comments were reviewed by the CHIP Steering Committee at their meeting. And after they discussed it, the Steering Committee wanted to modify 4 of the recommended actions. And they also added one new recommendation. So I'm just going to go over those changes, and the rest of the recommended actions that we presented at the last meeting stayed the same. So for the most part, it's fairly similar. So of the 4 recommended actions that they did modify wording, those were all from the SAB Protection and Restoration through Water Quality Improvement issue paper. So for recommended action 4.1, the steering committee decided they wanted to broaden the sources of potential funding for the SAB monitoring and management. So the action was reworded to, by 2023, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality will pursue recurring funding as well as funding from state, federal, and private sources. That includes the adequate amount of staff to successfully evaluate and meet the SAB acreage goals and implement all of the SAB recommended actions that contribute to meeting the goals. So before it just had pursue state recurring funding, and we've just broadened that. And I just want to point out that this issue paper is really key to making some really strong improvements in our coastal habitat conditions, because if you can improve the water quality for the seagrass, then you will improve it for the oysters and everything else. So unfortunately, we don't really have sufficient funding to assess that. As you go through management changes, you need to see if they're effective. So that's a key recommendation. Also, I want to point out that in the dates here, we have target dates to accomplish things, to make them smart and make us really stay focused on achieving things, but the date would refer to the end of the year. So by 2023 means December 2023. Another action that was changed was recommendation 4.4. This was modified due to concerns of having a specific target percentage of increasing the BMPs, best management practices, because those are highly dependent on funding. A lot of the best management practices come from the ag farm bill money, cost share programs. There's also funding available sometimes to like cost share for living shorelines that Aaron just mentioned, or other stormwater BMPs. So they modified this to take out the 50% target, and they also added to request increased funding toward these cost sharing programs. So by 2022, DEQ will form a work group with the Division of Water Resources, Division of Energy, Mineral, and Land Resources, Soil and Water Conservation, local governments, and other partners to increase best management practices related to water quality within SAB water body regions to the extent possible, consistent with current funding level, and request increased state cost share funding. And so those agencies are listed because they are the primary agencies that have a role with those BMPs. And then we had minor wording changes to recommended actions 4.7 and 4.8. Those were modified so that the focus of the action comes from the Environmental Management Commission rather than how it had been worded, which was for the Nutrient Criteria Development Plan Scientific Advisory Council to take action. But they are really advisors, so it was just reworded. So 4.7 is now by 2022, the Environmental Management Commission will receive guidance from the NCDP, SAC, or the Scientific Advisory Council, on establishing a water quality standard for light penetration with a target value of 22% at the deep edge of the SAV for high salinity regions, and a light penetration target of 13% to the deep edge for the low salinity regions. And then similarly, 4.8 now reads by 2022 at the request of the EMC, the NCDP SAC will evaluate the chlorophyll A water quality standards, and as needed, recommend it be revised by the EMC to ensure protection of SAV in high and low salinity water bodies, beginning with Albemarle Sound and Chewan River and continuing with the other water bodies. So I think we've mentioned in the past that process has already begun to look at that. And these these related to SAV, light penetration, chlorophyll, nutrients are potentially rulemaking. So I know that I have heard a lot of concern about water quality from this commission. And I think our role through the CHIP process is, to stay on it. This doesn't involve any rules you have to take, but we want to make sure that they understand your concerns and continue with that process. And then they added one new recommendation. As Jimmy mentioned, there was extensive input both at the advisory committee meetings and in emails received to form a public-private partnership. And the CHIP steering committee agreed with that. And because of that, made a new recommendation. And so that reads, by 2022, DEQ will support the formation of a public-private partnership that will engage a diverse group of stakeholders to assist in developing, implementing, and securing decision-maker support and funding for measures in the 2021 CHIP amendment that protect and restore water quality. And the concept there was that we can broaden our support. More people involved will help us accomplish more. It can broaden funding opportunities and just more collaboration. And by bringing in stakeholders from the beginning, we can really discuss better any obstacles to making those accomplishments happen. So other than those changes, the CHIP steering committee made a motion to send the 2021 CHIP amendment as they had modified it to the commissions, which is what brings us here today. And you are the last of the three commissions to look at it. The other two did approve the amendment unanimously. So that is all we have. We're just here to request final approval of this plan so we can get to work on it.
Great presentation. Questions or discussions? Pete? Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Further encourages that all avenues to obtain federal, state, local, and private funds to implement the actions in the plan be pursued, including forming the private-public partnership that the plan recommends. As suggested by the CHIP Steering Committee, the Marine Fisheries Commission will help identify, engage stakeholders to participate in the partnership and encourages the Coastal Resources Commission and the Environmental Management Commission to do the same.
Okay, is that motion on the screen as you presented it?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'll second that.
Second, Commissioner Posey. Okay, discussion on it. Commissioner Blanton. Or questions?
As it relates to the motion, I do not have anything. However, I would like to move back and ask a question about living shorelines and the protection based on the harvest or non-harvest off of those shorelines, because I'm trying to, it was first mentioned in the first presentation, then I heard it followed up a little bit in the questionnaire so far as percentage of people, and who would be the regulatory body to create those rules for one? Would that be the Marine Fisheries Commission or one of the other two commissions involved in this? Is that process moving forward? What conversations have been had? What do we need to know so far as how to protect those reefs people are actually investing probably private funds in? And I know there's like a gray area as to where the water, meets the land, who owns that, who has control over that. There's been a lot of moving pieces and parts on leases and, a lot of talk about this and I'm not too up on it, and I'm not sure who, how many of us are really up on that question. And so if you could just kind of speak to that one more time while we're on this topic, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure. So when you talk about a living shoreline, it's a way to stabilize the shoreline, create wetlands, sometimes oysters. Only oysters if it's in an area that shellfish would grow, right, with the right salinity. So you could have a living shoreline in Albemarle Sound and not necessarily have it, it won't grow oysters probably. But we have a committee that's been already formed, met once or twice to discuss how to do that. And I think at this point, we decided it would be MFC rule would be required. It would, we've just been in very much preliminary discussion stages. Like, would it be any oysters that grow on all living shorelines, or just the ones that are in open shellfish harvest waters? The reason it has come up is because they have had some incidences of poaching on those. And then DCM is also at the table on that, and their attorney as well, to try and figure out, authority and all that, and how significant a problem is it, because we don't know. But I don't really have too much more to add to that, except it would require rulemaking or proclamation. Yeah. So there is a concern because, like, after a while, the whole concept is you are recreating, the oysters will colonize. It would be difficult to distinguish a natural oyster reef from a successful living shoreline with oysters. So there's, those type of questions that have to be worked out still.
Follow up.
Yeah, just to follow, I would hate to see, the hard work of somebody else be cherry picked off of by individuals who have really no clue. Not saying that they don't have a clue, but they might not understand what has occurred fully, and the investment that's been made for the environment, for everybody involved in that living shoreline and why it's there. And I would hate to see that become a major problem and there be nothing there to protect that effort and that shoreline. Just an idea, if there is a living shoreline, maybe there's buffer zones that that's far off the shoreline. You can't harvest anything if any colonization occurs around that shoreline, that buffer line be, put out so far. Just an idea, but I would really like to see some development of a paper of some sort. And I don't know if that requires any sort of motion, additional motion to develop a paper. Who would develop that paper?
This committee that we have meeting, like Jacob steers it, Jacob Boyd. I'm on it. We have DCM on there, their attorney.
I don't know if it could
Jacob
go
will
in
have
with
to
the user conflict pieces that y'all are working on right now, as a sub item to the whole paper. I'm just trying to figure out how to get this in front of the commissioners here so we can take a closer look at it to help advance some of this, user conflict and solve some of these problems that y'all can foresee, coming. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we could bring an information paper back, because that's kind of how we have started it. Like Ann said, we've met twice, I believe. And, the biggest question we're still trying to figure out is the authority, because, a living shoreline is permitted, camera permitting through DCM. But then when you have natural recruitment of oysters, where does that fall in? Because, like the analogy we use, like if somebody has a dock and an oyster attaches to the dock, that oyster is public trust, but the dock is permitted. So we can bring back an information paper. We've been gathering information. North Carolina Coastal Federation has been providing information. And now with the CHIP getting approved, we can certainly bring back an information paper, just kind of outlining the issues and potential solutions to the problem, and then move forward, whether it's rulemaking through us, CRC, or wherever that lies, we can bring that back to you.
Thank you. Commissioner Henderson.
Yeah, and this is actually back to that question as well, because I'm excited about getting the CHIP moved along. I think the living shoreline is a fabulous thing to embrace. when we did take a look at the white paper on that, I would encourage you to not only look at it, think about it as planting an oak tree seedling, which when it's small, it needs a lot of care. 30, 40 years later, you're eating under the limbs, and kids are playing under it. We still have WPA rock groins around the waterways, a lot of places that are, and I don't know, I'm not sure how many folks are pulling oysters off of those, but I know they are all full of oysters. And so I would like just later on just some understanding of what are the rules up front while everything's juvenile versus thought forward going once everything is mature. And again, compare it to what are our rules right now on harvesting oysters off of the old rock groins. I'm not sure there are any, but depending on, as long as the water's sufficient. But anyway, just think ahead as we develop that paper. Let's look ahead long-term on that as well, because I think it's a great thing to do. I think once folks see oysters there in front of their house, if the water quality is sufficient, there may be a time when pulling some off is not inappropriate and not harmful, but that obviously has to happen once everything is stabilized.
And another thing to mention is they do have to be marked by the permit conditions. So there'll be poles with the signage so the general public would know that it's a permitted living shoreline.
Okay. No, I think it's a great thing. I just thinking ahead.
Anybody else with anything? Commissioner Romano.
I'll speak to that real quick, what we've been talking about. Just as a wild oyster, some people that harvest wild oysters, generally you can only keep a 3-inch oyster. So people stay away from anything. If you see a bunch of small oysters, you're not going to get in there. And in a lot of cases, some people would feel that when you're removing larger oysters from a reef, it allows for less competition from the larger oyster, then you have more growth. So it's not, I don't think it's a extreme problem. But aside from that, I had a question about the chip in general. I'm good with the motion, by the way. And that is as this is passed, what would you say is the biggest kind of low-hanging fruit that you guys could have the resources to kind of get on and you have some momentum? And then secondly, what would be part of the chip that you would think that would be the most difficult or you foresee needing to put most of your resources into?
I would say it's not a low-lying fruit, but the water quality standard change is already underway. And so I think the most important thing is to push that along and keep that going. And so it's low-lying because it's already started, but it will be also the most challenging. And then the other low line is we really need to look at the resilience funding from the latest budget and see how we can help guide that into getting these nature-based solutions in place. So a lot of that really fits well with what we're trying to do here with improving water quality, enhancing wetlands. A lot of that infrastructure money, budget money went to improving the wastewater infrastructure, which was one of the issue papers. So I guess that would be the lowest line because we don't have to do anything. The money has already been allocated to communities, but making sure that it, gets completed and monitor it to see if it does have an effect.
Anybody else? All right, if not, we have a motion and a duly made second on the floor. There's no further discussion. Let's just take a verbal vote. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank y'all very much for your work. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
if I could just make a comment, I just
Yes.
would like to thank the staff for their work on this. They are very few, but they are very mighty in the work that they've done on this chip, and we really appreciate all their efforts. I know they've got a lot of partners and a lot of other people working on this, but Ann and Jimmy, Casey, they really have done yeah, Casey and Trish, they've done a tremendous job as a lot of work has gone into this. So thank y'all very much.
Absolutely. This
Thank
is
you.
extremely important work that y'all are doing, and we appreciate it very much. Okay, moving on into rulemaking. First off, we're going to address some rule suspensions. Steve Poland, come on up, Steve.
Can you hear me now? All right, good morning. I'll try to be as efficient as Catherine is with the rule-related items. So just draw everyone's attention to the first item in the rulemaking update. It is a memo detailing the current list of rules suspended. The division has a policy where every November we verbally update the commission on current rule suspensions. At this time, there are no new rule suspensions to come before the commission, so there's no action item. But if you'll refer to the memo, there are currently 9 rules suspended indefinitely. And as part of that policy, we just draw your attention to these rules, and they're included in your memo for your review. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Anybody? Move on.
All right, efficient.
All right, thank you very much. So, who is going to talk about the, Shannon Jenkins? Who is going to talk about the additional labeling requirements of the repackaging foreign crab meat issue paper? You are, okay, great. Yeah, there it is. Okay, I see it down here. All right. Do help a little bit. Talk about from here to here. You're good, I believe.
There we go.
There you go.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present the issue paper, additional labeling requirements for repacked foreign crab meat in North Carolina. Again, I'm Shannon Jenkins. I'm the section chief for the Shellfish Sanitation and Recreational Water Quality section within DMF. I've got Sean Nelson here. He's our inspections program manager for permitted shellfish and crustacea facilities. Just as a reminder, the issue paper and memo are available in your briefing materials as well. I'd like to start with a quick refresher on crab picking and repacking. So permits and facilities are permitted in North Carolina according to our MFC rules 18A 100 section, which is packing, shipping of crustacea meat. There are 11 facilities in the state certified to either pick or repack crab meat. Typical products include fresh cooked crab meat. Crabs within a stainless steel basket are typically put in a large steam retort cooker under pressure. And after cooling, the crab meat is picked by workers using sanitary techniques and packed into plastic containers typically. Some product may additionally be pasteurized, which is a longer heated and cooling process that significantly extends the shelf life of the product. So what is repacking? Repacking is when you transfer crab meat from the original pack container into another container using sanitary techniques. Repacking is typically used by processors in order to market the product in their own branded containers. Sources of crab meat for repacking can come from domestic sources in the U.S. or from foreign sources, which in our rules is defined as any place outside the U.S. Sources of foreign crab meat for repacking may include the meat from 2 types of swimming crabs that are related to the blue crab from countries in Asia and South America, such as Indonesia, Mexico, and Venezuela, among others. Repacking crab meat from foreign sources typically involves receiving pasteurized product in metal cans that are then repacked directly into the processor's own branded plastic containers. So to recap the issue so far at your MFC business meeting last year on May 14th, an information paper on repacking of foreign crab meat in North Carolina was presented. Some of the issues discussed included the negative publicity of fraud, which has included representing foreign crab meat as product of the USA, and how that it may affect the reputation of the North Carolina crab meat industry and also decrease consumer confidence in what is authentic product of USA crab meat. Also, the possible confusion or deception of consumers despite the required country of origin labeling requirements. And also, after the presentation and discussion, the MSC directed DMS staff to initiate rulemaking to make it illegal to repack any imported crab meat in North Carolina into another container for resale in the state of North Carolina. So the rule language that resulted is proposed MFC Rule 15A NCAC 03L.0210 titled Repacking of Foreign Crab Meat Prohibited, which would make it unlawful for North Carolina crab processors to repack foreign crab meat into another container. The current status of that rulemaking effort is a scheduled vote by the Commission on final approval to adopt this rule later at today's meeting. Earlier this year at the May Commission meeting, the Commission discussed the possibility of a loophole to propose Rule 03L.0210 that would still allow North Carolina crab processors to have foreign crab meat repacked into their branded containers in other states and then sold in North Carolina. Also discussed was the possibility of using small text, stamped on text, or a checkoff box for the required country of origin label that may make it difficult for consumers to determine the origin of the product. The MSC subsequently approved a motion that the DMF develop rules so that any repacked crab meat container used for sale in the state of North Carolina that does not contain 100% domestic crab meat have an 18 type bold permanent print or larger statement of the country of origin clearly on the lid and two sides of the cup, and that a checkoff panel or stamped country of origin not be allowed. So in the issue paper that's presented before you today, additional labeling requirements for repacked foreign crab meat is proposed MSC Rule 15A NCAC 03L.0211 that would require additional labeling requirements for containers of repacked foreign crab meat in order to be sold in North Carolina. We'll now review the proposed rule. The first sentence in letter A of the rule points to existing labeling requirements for repacked crab meat that is contained in MSC Rule 18A.0173. These include required labeling such as the repacker's name and address, certification number, and a code indicating the repack date. The Commission's approved motion text begins with the second sentence in letter A, which reads, excuse me. Additionally, it shall be unlawful to sell foreign crab meat that has been repacked into another container unless the container is labeled in accordance with the following. 1, the country of origin of the crab meat preceded by product of shall be displayed in bold permanent print letters, not smaller than 18-point type on the lid and in 2 places that are on opposite sides of the container. And 2, a checkoff panel or use of a stamp applied to the container after it was originally printed to indicate country of origin shall not be allowed to fulfill the labeling requirements in subparagraph A1 of this paragraph. Letter B, this rule does not apply to crab meat that has been transformed into another product, such as crab cakes or other value-added products. So please note the two highlights, which indicate language that was additional to the MFC approved motion. Product of to precede the country of origin was additional to the motion in an effort to conform to U.S. Code of Federal Regulations 19 CFR 134. And that requires that made in product or other similar language is required to be present when the name of a location in the U.S. is present on the container and may mislead the purchaser as to the country of origin. For example, if the repacker's facility address was in Ocracoke, North Carolina, you would need to put product of whatever the foreign country was. So product of was chosen in this case as the language is already typically used in the industry, product of USA or product of Venezuela, for example. Requiring the country of origin on two opposite sides of the container was additional to the MFC motion in order to reduce ambiguity while still achieving the goal of the motion. For example, there was a possibility of questioning what constitutes a side on a round container. So I'll return to the rule text just for a moment. Let's show those two additions. So with the proposed rules, out-of-state processors would be required to conform to additional labeling requirements in order to sell repacked foreign crab meat in North Carolina. Possible effects of the rule include the possibility of having to redesign containers in order to fit the 18-point type country of origin and bold print in 3 locations on the container, including one on the lid and then 2 opposite sides of the container itself. So in the printing industry, a point is 1/72nd of an inch. So 18-point type would be approximately 1/4 inch tall, which can be significant. Now, this also depends on the font used, as it can vary depending on the font. As a reference in the example picture shown, the words gourmet and crab meat are approximately 18-point type size. Again, it's not an exact science, as it depends on the font used. But in this example, the G in gourmet and C in crab meat are a little larger than 18 point, but the rest of the letters would be a good example of what 18-point size would be. So again, the country of origin, for example, product of Venezuela, would need to be on 2 opposite sides of the container and on the lid as well, which, as you can see, would be significant in size. The issue paper contains additional information related to sizing on the discussion section on page 4. If there is questions about sizing, we also brought some example containers with some sizing examples as well that we could pass out. Another possible effect is whether out-of-state processors would comply with the additional labeling requirements, or alternatively just stop shipping repacked foreign crab meat to North Carolina. This could affect retailers and consumers if availability were to change as a result. So there are also possible enforcement challenges for Marine Patrol. One is due to the potentially large number of and geographic spread of grocery stores and retail outlets in North Carolina that could carry this type of product. Another is that the officers could have issues differentiating foreign crab meat that has been repacked versus foreign crab meat that remains in the original container. As an example, the state of Virginia does not differentiate between types of crab meat processors. They're only identified by their certification number followed by the letter C, which stands for crab meat processor. This is whether the product has been repacked or not. So there's a little bit different than North Carolina, which would have an RP, which would indicate that it definitely has been repacked. So in this example, it would have to be assumed that crab meat in a Virginia processor's container listing for foreign crab meat has been repacked. Now, with that said, it's likely that after an awareness and education campaign about any new rule, that only compliant containers would be sent to North Carolina for sale. The two options listed in the issue paper include the status quo, which would continue to allow foreign crab meat that has been repacked in another state to be sold in North Carolina without additional labeling requirements. The other option presented would be to adopt proposed MFC Rule 03L.0211 that would require additional labeling for containers of repacked foreign crab meat in order to be sold in our state. For the status quo option, it would avoid further economic impact on any North Carolina processors that may participate in that activity, as well as any grocery stores or retail outlets that market that type of product due to the additional labeling requirements. And historically, there's been up to 4 that participate in this activity of repacking foreign crab meat in North Carolina. In the second bullet point, the status quo would not resolve the possible loophole identified where in-state crab processors could have foreign crab meat repacked out of state and marketed within the state. In the third bullet point, it would not resolve the potential for fraud or confusion by North Carolina consumers regarding whether retail crab meat is domestic or foreign due to the less obvious labeling requirements. And finally, it would not comply with the MOC motion. The second option, which would set the adoption of the proposed rule in motion, would comply with MSC motion. It would reduce the potential for fraud or confusion by consumers regarding whether retail crab meat is domestic or foreign due to the more obvious labeling requirements. In the third bullet point, it may have a negative economic impact as a result of the additional labeling requirements for any of the North Carolina processors that may use out-of-state processors to repack foreign crab meat for state sale in our state. And finally, it may create enforcement challenges for Green Patrol, especially across the geographic spread of grocery stores and retail outlets across the state. So as indicated on the agenda, the next step would be for the commission to vote on its preferred management option and associated language for rulemaking. If option 2 is selected following today's meeting, staff would begin preparing the required fiscal analysis of the proposed rule with the goal of beginning rulemaking at your May 2022 meeting. So with that, Sean and I would be glad to try and answer any questions, if any. Thank you.
Any questions, discussions? Not, I think Commissioner Cross has a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank Shannon and Sean for their work on this. This has been a process that was undertaken quite a while back that really needs to be once for all put to bed. It'll basically level the playing field for domestic houses in the state with a lot of this so-called competition from foreign packed meat. And I'm not saying that in any of this that we're doing that the meat that you get from abroad isn't a good meat. It just needs to be sold and labeled as such. You don't need the confusion of the American meat or the domestic meat being sold against it and wonder why in some places you can see product $3, $4 a pound cheaper. It don't work that way, not in the crab picking industry. So, you know, when you see product that's much cheaper and it's marked with an American label, then something's wrong. And this will definitely label the playing field. It should make it fair for everybody. And if you want to sell the imported meat, just sell it as such. Just sell it as that in the marketplace. So with that, I move that we adopt the labeling requirements for repacked foreign crab meat as presented by the division for Rule 15A NCAC 03L.0211. Thank you.
Let's get the motion up on the screen, please. Okay, is that your motion as you have?
That is the correct number, isn't it?
And we've got it up there twice, is that? My eyes playing tricks on me. Yeah.
That is my motion, if that's the
Me-
correct number,
that's why-
corresponding number.
It needs a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to call attention to word adopt, that in the motion, at this point, the commission is selecting its preferred management option so that we can prepare the rule to begin rulemaking next May. So I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify that word. It may be best to use the preferred, selecting its preferred management
Okay.
option.
Commissioner Cross is fine with that, so if you can change the language there and remove the second one. I know it. You can't second your own motion. Okay. Can we remove the bottom parts?
Might just-
Okay.
Does it have it twice for you, Tricia?
Okay, you got it once, right? So Trish.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we're good with that. Okay. Is that your motion as you made it?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second to this motion? Second by Commissioner Hendrickson. Any further discussion? If not, take a, hold on. Commissioner Posey. We got the rule number in there. Okay, good enough? Okay, all right. Okay, any other discussions or questions? If not, I'll do a oral vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes without dissension. Great. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I feel like we need to play pomp and circumstances when Catherine comes up here. Catherine, I don't need to say a thing to you, just do what you do so well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those listening online or that are here in the room, just to introduce myself, I'm Catherine Bloom, and I'm the division's rulemaking coordinator. And in the rulemaking section of your briefing materials is a memo and supporting documents that provide an update to the commission on the status of rulemaking, and also requests your approval of 56 rules in the 2021-2022 Package A. And I'll pause here for just a moment if you would like to refer to the briefing materials. The rulemaking update memo is the first document, and that's probably the easiest document to follow as I briefly go through the rules. So I will start with a quick update on one of the rule packages from last year that has a couple items still pending, and there's no action on those for the commission today. At your August 2020 business meeting, so last year, you approved notice of text for rulemaking to begin the process for 50 rules in Package B, and you gave final approval of 41 of those at your February 2021 meeting. And all but 3 shellfish lease rules became effective May 1st of this year. And the 3 rules in question are automatically subject to legislative review in 2022. So those are still pending, and I'll keep you updated on those. And then you gave final approval of the remaining 9 rules for the subject General Regulations Joint at your September 2021 special meeting. Those rules are pending review by the Rules Review Commission. And on a parallel track, the Wildlife Resources Commission staff presented their recommended timeline for readoption of their joint rules, as well as a summary of potential changes to those rules during their October 27th WRC Joint Fisheries and Rules Committee meeting. And we have requested a copy of their proposed rules to review and are awaiting those. So next, I'm going to shift to this year's rulemaking cycle, and that includes rules from two different packages. And first up is Package A. Those are the rules that you're scheduled to vote on final approval today. So those rules began at your May meeting this year when you approved notice of text to begin the rulemaking process for readoption and amendment of the 56 rules in Package A. And these rules cover 4 different subjects. The first is general and gear rules that are in 15A NCAC 03I and 03J. The second topic is interjurisdictional species. The third topic is rules with minor changes relating to standards for handling, packing, and shipping crustacean meat. And the fourth topic is prohibiting the repacking of foreign crab meat in North Carolina. And those are the rules that Shannon and Sean just mentioned in their presentation. So a summary of each of those topics is provided in the rulemaking memo, and I'm happy to describe those further, but I do need to at least review the one written public comment that you received for Package A. And then also there are additional technical changes proposed to a portion of the 56 rules. So I will describe these items in the context of the corresponding subjects. So it was the second subject, which was interjurisdictional species rules. We received one written public comment that was submitted September 30th from the Wildlife Resources Commission. And those comments were in regards to 15A NCAC 03M 0519 shad. And the public comment letter is in your briefing materials. The comment is regarding the proposed changes to remove the season and bag limit from the rule and continue to set requirements via proclamation authority. And these portions of the shad rule continue to be suspended, and that's done in order to comply with requirements of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Interstate Fishery Management Plan for Shad and River Herring Amendment 3. And it's also for the North Carolina American Shad Sustainable Fishery Plan, and Chris gave you an update on that yesterday. So the season and bag limit in the rule are out of compliance and are expected to continue changing. So they need to be removed from the rule to help minimize confusion by stakeholders. At that October 27th WRC Joint Fisheries and Rules Committee meeting that I mentioned, the summary of potential rule changes that the WRC staff presented, including deleting the hook and line possession limit for American and hickory shad from the jointly adopted WRC rule that covers requirements for the harvest of shad. So this was about 1 month after their written public comment about the MFC shad rule was submitted. Related to the first subject, the 11 general and gear rules that are in subchapters 03I and 03J, they were originally published with no changes. However, revised version of each of the rules is included in your materials that have minor technical and conforming changes, and those are there for consideration for your final approval today. These technical changes address minor things like punctuation, capitalization, and consistent terminology, like using the word that instead of the word which. So there's no change to management proposed, and no impacts to stakeholders are expected. And similarly, for the third subject, that was the rules with minor changes related to shipping, processing, and handling crustacean meat. Revised versions of 2 of those rules are included for your consideration for final approval. And those also have minor technical changes, in this case, to conform to the additional rules that will be coming to you yet for readoption, so that all the rules use consistent terminology. We're starting to work on the remaining 80 rules that you have left for readoption. And in the process of doing that, saw a couple of things that we could go ahead and catch so that all the rules read the same by the end of all of the readoptions. So all 13 rules total with these minor changes are in the briefing materials, and those are the versions for your consideration for final approval today. Okay, so let me give you some context for the scheduled action item today and just a quick overview of the steps that have already occurred for these 56 rules in Package A. So on August 2nd of this year, a news release was issued and the proposed rules were published in the North Carolina Register. And you accepted public comments on those rules from August 2nd through October 1st, 2021. One written public comment was received about one of the interjurisdictional species rules, which I just described. And thank you to Commissioner Cross, who chaired the online public hearing back in August. That was held August 18th at 6 o'clock via WebEx. There were no members of the public in attendance. And all of the supporting documents for Package A are available in the rulemaking section of your briefing materials. Those include a table showing the timing of the steps in the process, the August 2nd North Carolina Register publication of the proposed rules, a summary of the hearing, the single written public comment received, and the 13 rules with the additional technical changes for your final approval, which I also described. Additionally, the fiscal analyses for the proposed rules were provided to you at your May meeting, and those continue to be available on the division website on the proposed rules webpage. The intended effective date of the rule package is April 1st, 2022. A portion of the rules in Package A are subject to legislative review. And that is due to Session Law 2019-198 and General Statute 14-4.1, both covering legislative review of regulatory crimes. And so those rules are expected to have a delayed effective date, and they do include the rules for the repack foreign crab meat. So today you're scheduled to vote on final approval of the 56 rules in Package A in accordance with General Statute 150B-21.3A, periodic review and expiration of existing rules. And Mr. Chairman, these could be addressed as a package or by individual subjects, however you'd like to proceed with them. So I'll just pause here for that action before I continue on with the rest of my rulemaking update.
Fantastic. Let's consider the whole Package A. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of the individuals that we are readopting? If not, can we have a motion to vote for the readoption of the rules as in Package A?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Posey and second by Commissioner Hendrickson. Okay. So motion as you made it, Commissioner Posey. See if you're paying attention.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing that may not have been included at the top of the motion is the element of the 13 rules that have the additional technical changes.
Okay, is that outside Package A?
It's all Package A, but it's the 13 versions, those 13 rules in your packet today, which have technical changes based on how they were published in the register.
Okay,
I
so we
can't
need
see the top.
to move that down a few, Dana.
I know there's a lag for what Patricia's working on and what we
Yeah.
can see.
The motion meant to include everything.
Okay.
So perhaps
What would you
at the
suggest?
top, just to motion by Martin Posey to approve, just comma, including technical changes proposed today, and then the following topics would, something along those lines,
All right. And you said that is fine with you?
presented today.
Any commission changes are fine with you? I thought it was. I was reading your mind. So, okay, so
There's a lot of technical language there. So thanks for your patience.
thank you for yours. Okay. Motion made, second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor of the readoption of these rules, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes without dissension.
Okay, I
Thank
just
you,
have a
Catherine.
few informational items and then I'll be out of your way. Okay, so I talked about this year's package. That was Package A, and just an update on the progress of Package B, and no action for any of the remaining items in my report. So at your August meeting this year, you approved notice of text for rulemaking to begin a package of 109 rules. And these rules cover the following 8 subjects: highly efficient gears, artificial reefs and research sanctuaries, shellfish leasing regulations, rules with minor conforming changes, a kind of a combo group of rules about definitions, imported species, record keeping, gear, marketing shellfish, and licenses. Then the 5th one, commercial blue crab harvest and gear regulations, permit and license suspensions and revocations, and pound net gears, administrative procedures, and then crustacea and shellfish. We had some additional rules there. So on October 1st of this year, a news release was issued and the proposed rules were published in the North Carolina Register. And you are accepting public comments on those rules from October 1st through 5 p.m. November 30th. And public comments on those rules may be submitted by an online form available on our website on the proposed rules webpage. And Laura gave you a presentation about how the public can comment, and appreciate the input we received about trying to streamline how the public can arrive at the landing page and connect to those public comment opportunities for rules and of course for our fishery management plans. So we'll keep working on that, make that more just easier for the public to get to. So public comments, in addition to the online form, can also be sent in by U.S. mail. Just for your information, so far we have only received a single written public comment from a citizen, and it was actually more of a question, not a comment. So that's something that, you know, we can follow up with that stakeholder. We'll give you a full report on any comments received at your February meeting. Then October 27th, Commissioner Cornegie chaired our public hearing for this package, and that was also held via WebEx. So thank you, Commissioner Cornegie. Again, no members of the public were in attendance, but it provides an important opportunity for the public to provide those verbal comments to the commission. So thank you, sir. So the proposed rules and the corresponding fiscal analyses for Package B are available on the division website. And as I said, we'll give you a full update at your February meeting. That's when you're scheduled to vote on final approval of that package of rules. The intended effective date for Package B is May 1st of 2022. A large portion of those 109 rules are automatically subject to legislative review, and they will have a delayed effective date. And I'll give you a fuller update on some of these effective dates and when we anticipate different things becoming effective at your February meeting. There's a lot of detail. I'll try to figure out an easy way to relay that to you. And so you can refer to the documents in Package B in your rulemaking briefing materials, and there you'll find a table showing the timing of the steps and also the October 1st news release and North Carolina Register publication of the rules. And so the last item in my rulemaking update is a preview of what to expect for next year's rule cycle, and that would begin at your May meeting. Today, you received a presentation from Shannon and Sean about the additional labeling requirements. And so we will be working on the fiscal analysis of the proposed rule text that you selected today, and with the goal of getting that ready so that you can begin rulemaking at your May meeting. And then in addition to that, division staff are developing an issue paper for the mutilated finfish rule, and you requested that at your August meeting. The paper is scheduled to be presented to you at your February meeting, and any proposed rules could possibly be included in the cycle next year, again, pending approval of a fiscal analysis that would need to be conducted and approved by OSBM in time for your May meeting. And then we'll also have a portion of the remaining 80 rules that are left for readoption in subchapter 18A for sanitation. And we're striving to do about half of those rules for this coming May's meeting, and then we'll have the remainder for the 4th and final year of readoptions of those rules. So that's as condensed as I could do, Mr. Chairman. That's everything I have in my update. I'm glad to try to address any questions you all may have.
You did a heck of a job as usual, and appreciate your professionalism. It makes life easier on all of us. Any questions on? Yeah, she's got job security, no question about it. Right, Madam Director? Yeah, they are tough sometimes. Any questions of Catherine on anything that have or will be talking about? No, Catherine, thank you very much. Appreciate all of your work. Now's the time on our agenda where I ask my fellow commissioners if there is any issues that we want to look at going forward that maybe didn't feel like was addressed or properly addressed in this meeting. So I'll open up the floor for anybody who wants to see us consider something in the future. Commissioner Romano.
This is just more of a general ask, and it's about a project I'm real familiar with. It's the Diamondback Terrapin rule that we put in place. And this is just a general ask, and I don't even know if this is really the particular area of the division, but one of the drivers behind doing the rule we made was that North Carolina was put on the list. It's not the Marine Stewardship Council. It was, I can't remember the other, Monterey Aquarium, Monterey Bay. So I just wanted to know if we'd contacted them, or we can outreach to say that we have made action. That way, just kind of revisiting that. We haven't met in a few years, and I know it's been, I don't know, that was just kind of my general ask to the division. And I don't even know if that's appropriate, really, but I know that was a driver.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. We have some response on that. Laura?
Yes, Chairman. So Dan Zapp can come up and give you more detail, but we
Okay,
have
great.
had an exchange with
All right.
with the group.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So after we had implemented the plan fully in February 2020, we reached out to Monterey Bay Aquarium and highlighted some of the management measures that were put in place in Amendment 2 or Amendment 3. Most specifically, the Diamondback Terrapin management areas that were implemented to address some of their concerns about the incidental take of Diamondback terrapins in the crab pot fishery. We also updated them on the stock status of blue crabs in North Carolina and the other management measures that were implemented. They did respond to us, and they were happy with some of the measures that we had put in place to address some of the concerns about Diamondback terrapin interactions. But they did also have concerns about the updated stock status for blue crabs. So with the overfishing and the stock being overfished, that was a concern for them from the new stock assessment. So they didn't feel like it was appropriate to reevaluate at this time, but they wanted to keep dialogue going to see how some of the issues that we have with overfishing and the overfish stock status would be addressed moving forward.
How often do they look at reevaluating this? Is there a schedule, or just whenever they feel like it, or?
I'm not positive if they keep to a certain schedule, but they do seem willing to evaluate new information as it becomes available.
Okay, all right. So, good for you. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Cross.
Yes, sir. With the approaching speckled trout FMP process coming along, when we get to that point, where I know it's a ways down the road, but when we get to that point in that plan, I'd like to see a tally or a TAC number somehow relating to speckled trout when we get there, just so we know what we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, we are still in stock assessment development, and obviously we will be back to this commission for input on issues for FMP development, so we can certainly take that into consideration. Commissioner Cross, thank you.
Anybody else with any issues? Mr. Hendrickson.
I had spoken with Kat and with Martin earlier about complimenting the division. We've all seen, I think most all of us have gone on the division's website, looked at the interactive map with the aerial photography that is particularly easy to relate to for the waters related to shellfish leases. And we've talked, and I looked, and they said we're going to actually look toward updating that website with an interactive version of the same mapping that would give us some of the latest aerial photography images relative to SAV and other things. I think some of that the sooner that can be uploaded and reconciled, the better some of the decision making can be on protecting some of those areas as well. So I just, that what we have currently with the shellfish leashes, by the way, is still just an incredible tool. So using that type, similar tool will, I think, be helpful all the way. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. Anybody else? Okay, great. Laura, would you give us our work plan and meeting assignments, please, ma'am?
Thank you for your patience. I just want to, I've pulled up the NFC work plan for the screen and for those watching online. You actually have this as part of the director's report. It's the first document there if you'd like to follow along, but I will go through that. All right, so I'm going to start with the issues from commissioners that I've just recorded. Commissioner Romano, it sounds like you would like sort of a regular update on the Diamondback terrapin status of things, so I'll put that on our calendar. Also, Commissioner Cross, I have noted the speckled trout towel or tack to be aware that you're looking for that when that's available. And Commissioner Hendrickson, I'll continue to make sure we update you as those maps are improved. For today or this meeting, you approved the full slate of nominees for the obligatory seat for the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. Chris Bat-Savage will now continue to work with those nominees in that process. You approved the goal and objectives for the Amendment 2 to the North Carolina FMP for interjurisdictional fisheries, and the division will continue drafting the plan with the Finfish Advisory Committee during the Advisory Committee workshop, which is scheduled to be held December 8th. You approved draft Amendment 3 to the Southern Flounder FMP for review by the public and advisory committees. So we will be opening the public comment period on December 15th, and that will be open for 30 days. And during that time, we'll also be holding the first of the public listening sessions, which is expected to occur in January. And also we'll have the reviewing advisory committee meetings scheduled after that. You selected your preferred management options and approved the draft Amendment 2 to the Shrimp FMP for departmental and legislative committee review. So staff will be moving that through that process. You gave final approval for the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan. And we will be addressing Commissioner Blanton and Commissioner Hendrickson's request to look into an issue paper to explore the regulation of living shorelines and their use and protection. So that was an issue that came up that I believe we can address through a current process. Let's see. You selected your preferred management option for labeling requirements for repacking foreign crab meat, and staff will be drafting the fiscal analysis for that rule. And to begin rulemaking for your May business meeting. And finally, you gave final approval for the rules in the 2021-2022 rulemaking package A. So at your February business meeting, that is going to be held at the Doubletree in New Bern. We just recently signed that contract, so that is set up, and you'll be reviewing the public comment for the Southern Flounder Amendment 3 and voting on your preferred management options at that time. You'll also receive the draft Amendment 2 to the Estuarine Striped Bass FMP, and you'll be voting to send that plan out for public and advisory committee review. You'll receive the issue paper on the mutilated finfish rule amendment, and you'll be selecting your preferred rule language at that time. And finally, you'll be voting on final approval of the 2021-2022 rulemaking package B, which Catherine just outlined for you in her update. And with that, if there are any questions, I do want to just go over the work plan. This was something that we developed just to try to help us track all of these activities for you and for the public as we go through. The topics list the items, and all of those are covered that I just verbally presented. And you can see the meetings. We just had November 2021. February 2022 is the meeting that we're coming up to next. So if you want to follow those in the future, you have that.
Right. Yeah, I like this. This is a good idea of yours. That New Bern is going to be in May.
That's in February.
February.
Mhm.
Okay.
And we will be at Beaufort Hotel in May.
Beaufort in May.
Mhm.
All right. Good enough. Thank you, Laura, for that. If there is no other business to be brought before the commission at this time, everybody have happy holidays, and we'll see you next year.